So you think you might be on the spectrum. Now what? Stick around to find out. Hi guys, I'm Claire and this is my channel, Woodshed Theory. I make content about what it's like living as an adult on the spectrum and also whatever other ideas come to my mind. I put out videos 3 times a week if I can. So if that sounds interesting to you or you are feeling gracious, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below so you never miss one of my videos. I am currently 1/3 of the way to my goal of 1,000 subscribers, so thank you to everyone who has subbed so far. I really, really, really appreciate it. So as many of you may or may not know, many people, especially women who are on the spectrum, are not diagnosed until they reach adulthood. Women usually get a diagnosis around the age of 30 to 40 years old, and almost always they themselves are personally responsible for getting themselves a diagnosis. I think no matter what ASD video you watch, you will be given similar information on this topic. Women get missed, I got missed. Now, if you look through my history and line it up with the DSM criteria, well, let's just say it's like looking in a mirror. Today, I wanted to address people who are thinking that they might be on the spectrum. I know that there may be other videos out there, but here you are listening to my thoughts, so thank you very much. I am talking about this because when I first realized that I was on the spectrum, it was like getting hit by a bus. If you've ever read Dune by Frank Herbert, it is what I imagine drinking the water of life must be like. Like standing still, but all the information of the universe is passing through you at once. It's disorienting and it's confusing. So I wish I would have had somebody to talk to me about what to do with the information that I believed I might be on the spectrum and what the next steps would be. For me, the process kind of went like this. Moment number 1 was my moment of realization. I was doing research on ASD and I happened upon a video talking about undiagnosed women in autism, and that led to moment number 2, confusion and panic. Because WTF, this is not possible. I would know if I was on the spectrum, right? I freaked out, I ran to my partner, I had another freak out, panic, crying, WTF again. This can't be happening to me. How could I not know? Just that whole flood of emotion. My third kind of iteration was deep diving into ASD information and having a lot of self-doubt. So I started researching ASD like crazy. I was trying to figure it all out. I was still freaking out. There was a lot of crying. Sometimes I was laughing because there was some sort of ironic humor that I could live for so long without knowing. Mind you, when I was crying, it wasn't necessarily because I was autistic. It was because I was upset and confused about not knowing that I was autistic and what that meant for my life leading up until that point. If you go through life thinking that you're just a little quirky, maybe not everyone's cup of tea, you have struggles, but that's on you, and then you find out that it was really just a mix of mental illness and autism spectrum disorder, well, it's just a lot to process. Moment number 4 for me was when I hit the brakes and decided that I needed to pull back on my freak out and maybe get a diagnosis from a professional, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. It's just something that I needed. And then moment number 5 was finally getting that diagnosis and starting the healing process for 30 years of undiagnosed autistic Drama! It's not a joke, but you know. So as I was saying, it's a whole journey, the process of figuring out that you're on the spectrum. So I just wanted to go through a few pieces of information, maybe tips, reassurances, advice. I don't know what the best word is, but if you got here through panic Googling, what if I'm autistic? Then here are my thoughts. My first piece of advice, if you think you might be on the spectrum, is don't panic. You are not alone. In fact, as I mentioned, quite the opposite. Lots of people who are on the spectrum don't find out until they're older. If you identify as male, you have a higher likelihood of learning this about yourself early on, but that is not always the case. Males can be diagnosed later on in life as well. Males can mask, males can hide their symptoms and fly under the radar. In the past decade, the medical field has taken great strides in the diagnosis and understanding of ASD in both male and female patients. This of course is great, but maybe not so great if you were born before the mid-90s. Like me. If you fall into this category, it's most likely that you spent your youth confused, undiagnosed, or misdiagnosed, and you are now confused on how you couldn't have known. So all of that is normal. Again, don't panic. You are in sensory overload. This is a lot of information. It actually took me several months to move on from the stage of WTF just because I didn't know how to process that kind of information. How do you process the fact that your brain is completely different than the neurotypical brain and you did not know for however amount of time, however long an amount of time? How do you process that and reconcile it with a lifetime of struggling and trying to figure out why? Why did no one notice? So yeah, first piece of advice is don't panic. This information about being autistic is a good thing. Learning and knowing about yourself is a good thing. Having a better understanding of who you are is a good thing. Having information about yourself is just the first jumping point toward a better and less stressful human existence. Despite what culture may have led you to believe, being on the autism spectrum is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. In fact, there are some amazing parts about being on the spectrum and an even more amazing community of ASD people who are here to welcome you with open arms. Tip number 2, you do not need to do anything with this information while you let it sink in. A few weeks or months is not going to change anything, so you don't need to make a rash decision. Take some time to think about what you want to do with the information. You have 2 general options. 1, be okay with the self-diagnosis, and 2, seek a professional diagnosis from a licensed doctor. Now, self-diagnosis. Some people are good from here. They realize that they are probably on the spectrum and that is enough for them. And I will tell you that I've learned that it's very rare that somebody think that they're on the spectrum and then end up not being on the spectrum. It can happen, but if you're thinking, wow, all of these things relate to me, then you are probably on the spectrum. A lot of people do their own research and have a self-diagnosis, which I believe is a completely valid option for many people, just because of the setbacks there can be in getting a professional diagnosis. For example, if you get a private diagnosis, it can be very expensive. Several $100s to over 4 figures. If Your healthcare provider will diagnose you. Mine wouldn't do it over the age of 23. There is the waiting period. In a lot of countries and places in the world, it takes a long time to get your GP to sign off on an assessment, getting your psychiatrist to sign off on an assessment, going through the waiting period of being able to get an assessment. I've heard of people waiting upwards of a year to get assessed. And then depending on where you are, there's the length of time that the assessment takes. Some assessments take an afternoon and others take several sessions, several hours, meeting with members of your family, doing different tests. It's just not for everyone. And that's why it's important that if you do decide to do a self-diagnosis, just know that that is a valid option and you're not alone. A lot of people go through that route. Now, for me personally, I found that the decision to get a formal diagnosis was the right decision for me. I would say in general in my life, I had a lack of confidence when it came to being certain about my health conditions. I would always think somewhat about what I was being told, but because of what I was being told, that I was always playing things up, even if I wasn't, or I was being a drama queen or whatever. So for me, it was very important for me to get a professional diagnosis, and I am so grateful that at the time I was in the position to be able to afford that and have it happen pretty smoothly. I'm so grateful that that was able to happen and that I have my professional diagnosis. For me, it gives me the peace of mind that no, it's not just me thinking this. It's real. And I don't want to say it as a way of, oh, if you self-diagnose, it's not real. But for me, it felt a lot more real to have a doctor. I don't want to say the word real. For me, it was very validating to have a doctor say, yes, I think that you're on the spectrum. Because I was so unsure. It all sounded like me, but how could it be possible? Because how could somebody go for 31 years and not know that they were on the spectrum and not know that the issues that they were dealing with had a rhyme or reason? And that assurance just gave me confidence and peace of mind. But not everybody needs that. So if it's something that you think is important to you, go ahead and get the formal diagnosis. But if it's something where you're like, no, I meet these criteria, this is me, I would say that you can still have the full support of the autistic community if you're not getting a formal diagnosis, or if you're in that waiting period of getting a diagnosis. In my experience, you'll still have full support of the autistic community. There are not that many gatekeepers in the autistic community. We're pretty open arms, so you can start getting support from your people right away. For my final tip, give yourself some grace and time. As I've been mentioning throughout this video, finding out that you are on the spectrum is a shock to the system. Even if you have suspected before, never really thought about it, but maybe really learning and finding out that you're on the spectrum, it took me several months before I could even think about pursuing a diagnosis. I was in a straight up panic. I was really afraid. I didn't know what it meant. I only had cultural references depicting males on the spectrum, and I only had my preconceived notions about what I thought autism looked like. And I was wrong. And I am so glad that even though in the moment it felt too overwhelming to continue, I'm so glad that I pursued this information about myself and gave myself that grace, because this has been one of the, if not the most important discovery that I've had about myself, and it has completely changed my life for the better. I know that that might not be everyone's experience, but I'm hoping that it will be your experience. And I wish that I had had somebody to tell me, don't panic, consider your options, give yourself some grace. It's going to be fine. Because when I first found out, I was just inconsolable. I just went very inward and was trying to figure out everything. Like putting on a pair of glasses and all of a sudden everything comes into focus and all you can think about is how you couldn't see, but you didn't know you couldn't see, and this is how everybody sees. That's what it's kind of like learning that you're on the spectrum. So I hope that this was helpful for you. I really would recommend you getting in touch with maybe some ASD Facebook groups for adults on the spectrum or teenagers on the spectrum. Find other people who are on the spectrum who maybe you can relate to, and really kind of just start allowing yourself to work through everything. I'm so happy that I did, and I just want you to know it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. Now that you know, you'll be able to understand yourself at such a deep level, and you'll be able to start really embracing who you are as a person and thriving, as opposed to trying to fit into a world that just wasn't built for you. And that is my video for today. I hope that it was helpful. It's something I feel really passionate about, helping people who are just learning they're on the spectrum. How about you? Do you have any advice if you have been diagnosed, either self-diagnosed or professionally diagnosed? When you first found out that you were on the spectrum, what would you have liked to have heard from other people? What would have been helpful for you in that moment of panic, pure fear, the unknown? What would you have liked to know? So that is our video for Monday. Again, if you liked this video, I hope that you will stick around. I put out videos 3 times a week. Got some cool stuff coming up, so I'd love to have you. And I respond to all my comments if I can. So have a wonderful Monday, and I will see you on Wednesday.